The emergency session lights blazed across the grand chamber of the Galactic Council as representatives from 47 species rushed to their designated platforms, their faces showing various expressions of confusion and concern that transcended biological differences. Ambassador Vela of the Decion Confederacy floated into her position, her luminescent form pulsing with agitation as she reviewed the reports, streaming across her neural interface for the third time in as many minutes. Hoping the information would somehow change, did not the Krathic Dominion had launched a full military assault on 3 human colony worlds in the Outer Rim sectors without provocation, without declaration, without even the courtesy of a territorial dispute to justify their actions? This makes no sense, Vela transmitted to her aide, a younger Thesian named Morven who hovered nearby. Equally bewildered by the developing situation, the humans had been part of the Galactic Council for only 70 standard years. Barely a moment in the grand timeline of interstellar civilization, and they had been nothing but model citizens during that entire period. They traded fairly, sharing their unusual entertainment media and surprisingly efficient engineering solutions with anyone who asked politely. They colonized carefully, always checking territorial claims 3 times before establishing settlements and apologizing profusely if any boundary disputes arose there. Military presence was modest at best, laughably small according to the security analysts, who had reviewed their defensive capabilities during the application. Processed 23 cruisers, 48 frigates, and maybe 200 support vessels, spread across 15 star systems. Hardly the fleet composition of a species anyone needed to fear or preemptively attack the Council. Chamber filled with the multilingual buzz of confused discussion as more representatives arrived and accessed the same troubling data. High Chancellor Vermex, a towering crystalline being whose species had guided the Council for the past millennium, called the session to order with a harmonic tone that silenced all lesser conversations instantly. We convene an emergency session to address the unprovoked military action taken by the Krathic Dominion against the human colony worlds, designated New Sarajevo, Perseverance Station, and Terra Nova, Vermex announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Ambassador Vela, you have attempted diplomatic contact? Vela's form brightened as she activated her communication privileges and addressed the assembled council with barely controlled frustration evident in her bioluminescent patterns. I have. Hi, Chancellor, she responded. The Krathic War Premier. Draktos answered my hail personally and showed zero concern for galactic law or council protocols, while holographic projection materialized in the center of the chamber. Displaying the recorded conversation for all to witness were, Premier Draktos appeared as his species always did, massive, with 6 limbs and a face that seemed designed specifically to intimidate prey species. His tone carried the casual arrogance of someone who believed themselves utterly beyond consequences. The humans are weak, Ambassador Draktos had said in the recording, his translator rendering his growling speech into standard galactic. Their worlds are poorly defended, their technology is primitive compared to ours, and their military is a joke that any competent force could sweep aside in weeks. They are a protected developing species under council law, Vela had protested in the recording. Your actions constitute a clear violation of the Celestial Accords, Draktos had laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Before responding with dismissive contempt, the council moves slowly, debates endlessly, and acts rarely, he had said. By the time you organize any response, the human worlds will be ours and their people will serve the Dominion as the useful worker drones. They were always meant to become. The recording ended, and the chamber erupted in outraged discussion once more. Several species immediately called for military intervention, while others counseled caution and adherence to non-interference protocols. Vela listened to the arguments swirl around her and felt a deep sense of unease that went beyond the obvious illegality of the Krathic actions. Something about this situation felt wrong in ways she could not quite articulate. Accessed the human application files during a lull in the debates, searching for something her memory insisted was important. Humans had submitted remarkably complete documentation when applying for council membership 7 decades ago, cultural records, technological assessments, biological data, historical archives. But as Vela scrolled through the historical section, she noticed something peculiar. Enormous gaps existed in the timeline, with entire millennia summarized in single paragraphs marked full details available upon request, but apparently never requested by the Application Review Committee. One section in particular caught her attention. Period of intensive technological development and social reorganization. Approximately 1900 to 2100 CE by human reckoning. The summary stated simply that humans had resolved internal conflicts through diplomatic means and unified their homeworld government. Before beginning space exploration, curiosity drove her to request the full files, initiating a data transfer that would take several minutes to complete, given the apparent size of the unabridged records. Meanwhile, the council debate reached a predictable conclusion. We are bound by our own laws. High Chancellor Vermix declared, unless directly threatened, we cannot intervene in conflicts between member species and non-member populations without unanimous consent. The vote was called and failed, as such votes nearly always did when military action was proposed. When the 3 species voted for intervention, 17 against and 7 abstained, falling far short of the unanimity required. However, Vermex continued, we will monitor the situation closely and reconvene immediately if circumstances change, or if the Krathic Dominion threatens council territory or additional member species. Ambassador Vela felt the weight of helplessness settle over her consciousness as the session concluded and representatives began departing. To return to their normal duties, the humans would face the Krathic assault alone, at least for now. Her data transfer completed with a soft chime, and Vela began reviewing the unabridged human historical records with growing horror. The period of intensive technological development had been anything but peaceful. Diplomatic resolution to global wars, dozens of smaller conflicts, genocides, weapons capable of rendering their entire planet uninhabitable, in a Cold War that had nearly resulted in their self-extinction. And that was just 1 century among thousands. Full human historical record read like a nightmare catalog of every possible way a species could attempt to destroy itself and somehow survive. Anyway, war after war after war, stretching back through their entire recorded civilization. Vela accessed more files with trembling appendages and discovered that human entertainment media, the charming stories they traded so freely across the galaxy, were filled with invasion narratives, survival scenarios, and post-apocalyptic survival tales. These were not fantasies to humans. They were cultural preparation, warnings passed down through generations to never forget what they were capable of inflicting upon themselves and others. Oh no. Vela whispered to herself as understanding dawned. Oh no, Drakthos, what have you done? The Krathics had not attacked a peaceful developing species. They had just attacked a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare against themselves and had only recently decided to try something different. She immediately began composing an urgent message to War Premier Drakthos, but she suspected it was already too late. The humans would respond, and given what she was reading, that response would likely shock everyone involved. The Krathic Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace above New Sarajevo with all the confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. Their massive war dreadnoughts, casting shadows across the colony world's 3 moons as they assumed. Bombardment Positions Fleet Commander Vorsak reviewed the tactical displays with satisfaction, noting the minimal defensive installations and the single outdated orbital platform that represented the entirety of the colony's military protection. This will be over before the next meal cycle, he announced to his bridge crew. Transmit surrender demands and give them 1 standard hour to comply before we begin demonstrations. What happened next would be analyzed by military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The humans did not surrender. Instead, every civilian vessel in orbit, cargo haulers, mining ships, passenger transport suddenly changed course and accelerated directly toward the Krathic fleet in a coordinated pattern that suggested pre-planned tactical doctrine rather than panicked. "Flight they are running," one officer reported, then corrected himself with confusion. "No, Commander. They are approaching our position at attack speed." Orsak watched in bewilderment as the civilian vessels began transmitting on all frequencies. Not pleas for mercy, but something else entirely. Music. Human music. Loud and aggressive, with a driving rhythm that seemed designed to accompany violence. Then the civilian ships opened. Fire-hidden weapons bays revealed themselves. As hull panels fell away and, supposedly, unarmed transports began launching missiles, firing energy weapons and deploying attack drones that swarmed toward the Krathic vessels like angry insects return fire. Vorsak ordered, shocked but not yet concerned. "Destroy these impudent—" His command was interrupted by alarms screaming across every system as the orbital platform he had dismissed as outdated suddenly activated weapon systems that had been powered down and hidden from casual scans railguns that could accelerate projectiles to relativistic speeds opened fire, turning 3 Krathic frigates into expanding clouds of debris before their shields could even activate properly and the planet's surface. The response was equally unexpected, and equally Pharaoh-Soskarathik dropships landed in what should have been an easy occupation of the colonial capital. Expecting frightened civilians and perhaps token resistance from a small security force instead, they found a population that had been waiting for exactly this scenario. Every human adult, it seemed, knew how to fight. They attacked from buildings using weapons that ranged from military-grade rifles to improvised explosives crafted from mining equipment and agricultural chemicals. They used the terrain with expertise that suggested extensive training, falling back through prepared positions and inflicting casualties far beyond what their numbers should have allowed. One Krathic ground commander transmitted a desperate message back to the fleet. "They fight like they have done this before, like they have been preparing for invasion their entire lives." He was more correct than he knew. Across the 3 targeted colony worlds, the pattern repeated with variations, but always the same core theme. Humans refused to surrender, fought with everything available, and demonstrated tactical knowledge that should not exist in a species classified as peaceful traders at Perseverance Station. A mining colony built into an asteroid. The humans collapsed entire sections of tunnels on advancing Krathic troops and then counterattacked through maintenance shafts too small for the larger Krathic bodies to navigate effectively at Terra Nova. The colonists evacuated their cities entirely and then fought a guerrilla campaign from the wilderness, using their knowledge of local terrain to make every kilometer of advance cost. The Krathic's blood and equipment. Meanwhile, across human space, something was awakening that the galaxy had not anticipated on Earth. In the halls of the United Nations Space Command headquarters, Fleet Admiral Chen reviewed incoming reports with an expression that her staff had learned to recognize and fear. Cold. "Calculated Fury activate protocol Sparta," she ordered quietly, using a code word that had existed since humanity first left their solar system but had never before been spoken in an operational context across 15 star systems. Manufacturing facilities that produced civilian goods smoothly transitioned to military production using pre-designed templates and stockpiled materials. Shipyards that built cargo vessels began assembling warships from modular components that had been coincidentally designed with dual-use capabilities. The human civilian fleet, it turned out, was largely composed of vessels that could convert to military configuration in a matter of hours. Hidden weapon systems were activated. Armor plating that had been stored for potential asteroid collision protection was installed, and civilian crews who happened to have hobby training in tactical operations took their positions. The Human Reserve Fleet, which the Council had cataloged as 48 frigates used for system patrol and anti-piracy operations, revealed itself to be significantly more substantial than advertised. Weapons that had been listed as civilian-grade mining lasers turned out to be military-grade. Energy cannons operating at reduced power settings. Those 48 frigates were joined by another 200 vessels that emerged from various locations where they had been in storage or under maintenance for years. Earth's moon, which hosted several human research stations and mining operations, suddenly displayed defensive capabilities that suggested it had been fortified as a backup command center and last stand position. Mars, humanity's second major colony, activated orbital defense grids that were far more extensive than anything in the public records. Admiral Chen opened a communication channel to all human military and civilian leadership across known space and delivered a message that was brief, clear, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. The Krathic Dominion has attacked our people without provocation or mercy, she stated, her voice carrying none of the diplomatic softness humans usually employed in galactic communication. We tried to leave our violent past behind when we reached for the stars. We tried to be better than our history. But that choice has been taken from us. She paused, and when she continued, every human listening felt the weight of thousands of years of accumulated martial knowledge behind her words. We remember how to fight. We remember how to win, and we will teach the Krathics why humanity survived every attempt we made to destroy ourselves. Admiral Chen declared, activate all reserve forces, recall all vessels to designated rally points, and prepare for offensive operations. We are done being peaceful. The message was transmitted on open channels, meaning the Galactic Council monitoring stations received it, along with every other listening species in the sector. The Council observation station monitoring the conflict, Ambassador Vela watched the data streams with growing alarm as human military assets that should not exist began appearing on sensors. She had sent her urgent warnings to the Krathics, but War Premier Dracthos had dismissed them with the same arrogance he had shown before. Now, she watched as the humans demonstrated exactly what a species did when they had spent their entire existence fighting themselves and had learned every lesson the hard way. The Krathic Third Fleet, which had expected an easy victory at New Sarajevo, found itself fighting for survival against an enemy that used tactics no civilized species would consider: ramming attacks, kamikaze drones, weapons that violated several conventions about acceptable warfare, and a complete disregard for their own casualties in pursuit of tactical objectives. Within 72 hours, the Third Fleet was in retreat, having lost 30% of its strength to an enemy that was not supposed to be capable of meaningful resistance. Similar reports came from Perseverance Station and Terra Nova. Krathic forces stalled, taking losses, facing an enemy that simply would not stop fighting no matter how hopeless their situation appeared. War Premier Dracthos, reviewing the disaster unfolding across three fronts, made the decision that would seal his species' fate, could not afford to appear weak or to admit that he had miscalculated so drastically. Therefore, he did what prideful leaders throughout history have always done when faced with unexpected resistance. He escalated. Recall all fleet elements, he ordered. Assemble the Grand Armada and plot a course for the human homeworld. If we cannot break them in the colonies, we will break them at their source. We will strike Earth itself and force their complete surrender. The orders were transmitted, and across Krathic space, the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in 3 generations began gathering for what they believed would be the final decisive blow. They did not know that they were about to discover why humanity had hidden the majority of their military capability in one location, concentrated around their homeworld. Like a fortress, they did not know that they were sailing directly into the prepared defenses of a species that had been planning for alien invasion since before they had invented faster-than-light travel. They definitely did not know that humans had a saying about attacking someone's home. You have made a terrible mistake. Ambassador Vela transmitted to Dracthos one last time, her message heavy with foreknowledge of disaster. Please reconsider this course of action. But Dracthos did not listen, and the Grand Armada set course for Earth. The Battle of Artemis's Belt began with what appeared to be a catastrophic mistake by the human forces and ended with the complete annihilation of the largest Krathic fleet deployment in the war. Thus far, Carrier Group Valkyrie, under the command of Admiral Marcus Webb, had been tasked with delaying the Krathic advance toward the inner systems, while the main defense fleet completed preparations around Earth intelligence had predicted the Krathiks would send approximately 50 vessels through the Artemis Belt, a dense asteroid field rich in valuable minerals that the humans had been mining for decades instead. Sensors detected 167 Krathic warships emerging from hyperspace in a show of overwhelming force, designed to crush any resistance through sheer numerical superiority. S Command consisted of 1 carrier, 6 cruisers, and 12 frigates outgunned by a ratio that would make any sane commander retreat immediately to preserve their forces for the larger defense. Admiral, recommend we fall back to Rally Point Thermopylae, his tactical officer suggested. Referencing the prepared defensive positions closer to Earth, we cannot win this engagement. Webb studied the tactical display with an expression that had not changed since the war began. Calm, cold, and calculating. We are not here to win, he replied. We are here to teach them why attacking humanity was the worst decision their species has ever made. Navigation. Plot a course directly into the densest part of the asteroid field. Full speed, make it look like we are running scared. The carrier group accelerated into the Artemis Belt, with the Krathic fleet in pursuit, their commanders no doubt celebrating what appeared to be an easy victory against fleeing prey. What the Krathiks did not know was that human mining operations in the belt had not just been extracting valuable minerals for the past 40 years. They had also been carefully placing thousands of tons of nuclear explosives throughout the densest regions, connected by a network of communication relays that waited silently for activation. Codes that had existed since the mines were first installed. The weapons had been classified as asteroid deflection charges in all official documentation, part of a planetary defense initiative against potential collision threats. The fact that they could also be used to turn an asteroid field into the largest minefield in human history was merely a convenient secondary function. Webb led the Krathic fleet deeper into the belt, his vessels weaving through asteroids with practiced precision that came from years of training in this exact environment. The Krathiks followed, their larger vessels struggling with the tight navigation, but confident that they would eventually corner the humans in a dead end. Trajectory: all ships, prepare for emergency stop and defensive formation. Webb ordered. When the fleet reached the designated coordinates, execute in 3, 2, 1. Mark. The human vessels fired reverse thrusters and rotational jets in a coordinated maneuver that killed their forward momentum in seconds and oriented them toward the pursuing Krathiks. Activate the field, Webb said quietly. Throughout the asteroid belt, thousands of nuclear charges received their activation signals simultaneously. The explosions were carefully shaped and precisely timed, designed not just to destroy ships directly, but to fragment asteroids into high-velocity shrapnel that would tear through shields and armor with devastating effect. Krathic fleet, packed tightly together as they navigated the asteroid field, had nowhere to run and no time to react. The first wave of explosions vaporized 47 ships instantly, while the subsequent fragmentation killed another 63 as asteroid debris, traveling at relativistic speeds, punched through their holes. The survivors, caught between the minefield ahead and the human fleet behind, tried to scatter, but found that every direction had been calculated and seeded with destruction. All vessels, free fire, Webb ordered, and his ships began methodically targeting the disorganized Krathiks with precision, strikes that exploited every gap in their formation. Battle lasted 17 minutes from activation to the final Krathic vessel's destruction. Not a single human ship was lost on the Council observation platform. The analysts watching the engagement sat in stunned silence as they reviewed what had just occurred. They mined an entire asteroid field.
Ow.
One of them finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. They planted nuclear weapons throughout their own mining operations and waited for years in case someone attacked them. What kind of species does that? Another asked. Though the question was clearly rhetorical, Ambassador Vela knew the answer because she had read the human histories. A species that had learned through painful experience that preparation for the worst case scenario was the only way to ensure survival, the kind of species that had nearly destroyed themselves multiple times and had developed cultural Paranoia as a survival trait, the Battle of Artemis's Belt became the turning point, not because of its tactical significance, but because it revealed the fundamental miscalculation the Krathiks had made. They had assumed human military doctrine would follow galactic norms, honorable fleet engagements, proportional responses, and adherence to the conventions of civilized warfare. Instead, they faced an enemy that fought with every advantage they could create, using tactics that ranged from brilliant to absolutely terrifying in their ruthlessness. News of the disaster reached War Premier Drakthos as his grand armada gathered for the assault on Earth. And for the first time since the war began, he felt the cold touch of doubt, but he had committed too much, lost too many ships, and staked his personal honor on this campaign to back down now. The Krathik people expected victory, and his political rivals would destroy him if he returned with defeats, so he doubled the forces assigned to the Earth assault, pulling vessels from every defensive position across Krathik space, assembling an armada of over 800 warships. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had deployed in its entire history. Enough firepower to crack a planet's crust or sterilize all life from a world, surely, Drakthos reasoned. No defensive force could stand against such overwhelming might. The Grand Armada departed for Earth with great ceremony, broadcast across Krathik space as a demonstration of their species' power and inevitable victory on Earth. Fleet Admiral Chen watched the intelligence reports tracking the approaching armada and felt no fear, only a grim satisfaction that events were proceeding exactly as predicted. They are bringing their entire military to our home, she said to her staff, which means they are leaving their own worlds vulnerable. But more importantly, they are about to learn what we have really been preparing for all this time. The truth that the Krathiks were about to discover was simple. Humanity had never stopped planning for war, even as they explored the stars and joined the peaceful Galactic Council. Even as they traded and made friends and tried to leave their violent past behind, they had never forgotten the first rule of human survival: hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Earth's defensive grid began activating systems that had been built over the course of 70 years, constructed in secret or hidden in plain sight as civilian infrastructure orbital stations that had been classified as weather monitoring platforms revealed missile batteries and energy weapons construction yards on the moon, open to release defense drones by the tens of thousands. Mars shifted orbit slightly using hidden thrust systems, moving into optimal firing position with weapons that had supposedly been built for asteroid minings. The asteroid belt beyond Mars, which had been extensively mined and colonized, turned out to be fortified with defensive platforms that made Artemis's belt look like a warning shot. Then surrounding all of this, hiding in the darkness of space with their systems powered down to minimal levels, waited the true human defense fleet, not the 48 frigates the Council knew about, not even the 200 reserve vessels that had been revealed, over 1,500 warships that had been constructed in secret, hidden in deep space storage, and maintained by civilian crews who were actually military personnel on extended rotation ships, designed and built specifically for one purpose: defending Earth against an extinctional-level threat. Humans had been preparing for alien invasion since before they invented faster-than-light travel. Since the moment they looked at the stars and realized they might not be alone, every first contact protocol, every diplomatic mission, every peaceful trade agreement had been conducted with the background assumption that one day someone might attack them, and on that day, they would be ready. War Premier Drakthos's Grand Armada emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, and sensors immediately began detecting the defensive installations with growing alarm. "How many ships do they have?" Drakthos demanded as the tactical display filled with contact icons that kept multiplying. The intelligence reports said they had less than 300 total vessels. His sensor officer's voice shook as he replied, "War Premier, we are detecting over 1,500 combat-capable ships and an unknown number of automated defense platforms. This is impossible," Drakthos said. But he was staring at the evidence that made his statement a lie. They could not have hidden a fleet this size, but they had. And now the Krathik Grand Armada faced a choice: retreat in humiliation or attack, against odds that had shifted dramatically from what they expected. The Battle of Seoul lasted for hours and 17 minutes, and it redefined galactic understanding of what human beings were capable of when fighting for their survival. War Premier Drakthos had expected a desperate defense, a chaotic scramble to protect their homeworld against his overwhelming numbers. Instead, he faced something that military historians would later describe as the most precisely coordinated defensive operation in recorded galactic history. The human fleet did not rush forward to meet the Krathic advance. They waited, positioned in layers of defensive spheres that had clearly been planned and rehearsed countless times. As the Grand Armada pushed deeper into the solar system, they began taking fire from automated platforms hidden among the asteroids, each one targeting with accuracy that suggested advanced AI support. Press forward, Drakthos commanded. Accepting these losses as the inevitable price of victory, reached their primary fleet and engaged directly. But reaching the primary fleet proved far more costly than anticipated. Humans had divided their defensive force into 6 distinct battle groups, each one positioned to support the others with overlapping fields of fire. When Krathic forces concentrated against one group, the others would shift position and attack their flanks. When the Krathics tried to spread out to prevent being flanked, the human groups would focus overwhelming firepower on isolated sections of the Armada. The defensive coordination demonstrated tactical doctrine that was simultaneously simple in concept and brutally effective in execution. They fight like they have done this exact scenario 1,000 times, one Krathic fleet commander reported before his ship was destroyed by concentrated railgun fire from 3 directions. Simultaneously, they had done exactly that. Every human military officer underwent training simulations, specifically designed around defending Earth from numerically superior alien invasion forces. The scenarios had been refined over decades, incorporating every lesson learned from human military history and adapted for space combat. When the Krathic forces finally reached engagement range with the primary human fleet, they discovered another unpleasant surprise. The human ships were heavily armored in ways that made no sense. For vessels that supposedly engaged in peaceful trade and exploration, their weapons systems were redundant and over-engineered, continuing to fire even after sustaining damage that should have disabled the manned. Their crews fought with a determination that bordered on fanatical, refusing to abandon damaged vessels and often using crippled ships as weapons themselves. They are ramming us, a shocked Krathic commander transmitted as a human destroyer, its engines destroyed and hull breached, fired its emergency thrusters to intercept and collide with a Krathic battlecruiser. Their own people are still aboard, and they are using the ship as a kinetic weapon. Fleet Admiral Chen listened to the intercepted Krathic communications from her command center deep within Earth's moon and felt no satisfaction. Only grim necessity. Each human life lost was a tragedy. But warfare was mathematics written in blood, and the mathematics of this battle were clear. The Krathic Grand Armada numbered 800 ships when it arrived. That number was dropping steadily while human losses remained proportionally minimal. Mars batteries. You are cleared to fire, she ordered, and the planet's concealed weapons systems activated what the galaxy had believed to be civilian infrastructure for terraforming Mars. Massive fusion reactors and particle accelerators for atmospheric processing revealed their true nature as the largest fixed position weapons humanity had ever constructed. Beams of coherent energy that could theoretically be used to strip away Mars's thin atmosphere instead lanced across space to burn through Krathic capital ships like a blade through paper. Psychological impact on the Krathic forces was immediate and devastating. They had come expecting to fight a desperate, outmatched defender. Instead, they were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that had prepared for this exact confrontation with a level of paranoid thoroughness that defied comprehension. War Premier Drakthos watched his fleet dissolve around him and finally understood the magnitude of his error. The humans had not been peaceful because they were weak. They had been peaceful because they were trying to control something inside themselves, something that he had just unleashed all ships. Retreat, he transmitted, abandoning pride in favor of survival. fall back to hyperspace jump distance, and disengage. But the humans had anticipated this, as well-mining drones that had been positioned throughout the outer system suddenly activated and began releasing clouds of metallic, chaff, and electromagnetic interference that disrupted hyperspace. Calculations: the Krathic ships could still jump, but doing so without proper calculations would result in catastrophic navigation errors that would strand ships in deep space, or worse, we are trapped. Dracothos realized. Watching his tactical options collapse to nothing, the human fleet began the final phase of their defense, systematically destroying every Krathic vessel that refused to surrender. Broadcasts were transmitted in Krathic language, offering quarter to any ship that powered down weapons and submitted to being boarded. Some Krathic commanders accepted, choosing survival over pointless death. The others fought to the end, their ships becoming expanding debris fields that would orbit Earth's sun for millennia as monuments to the price of hubris. When the interference finally cleared enough for hyperspace jumps, fewer than 100 Krathic ships remained from the Grand Armada of 800. They fled in disorder. All thoughts of conquest abandoned in favor of escape. The humans could have pursued and destroyed them, but chose not to, allowing the survivors to return home and spread the tale of what happened when you attacked Earth on the Council observation platform. Ambassador Vela and her fellow observers sat in stunned silence as they processed what they had witnessed. Request complete human historical records. The High Chancellor's voice came through on secured channels, all of them unredacted. Immediately, I want to understand what we have been sharing the galaxy with. The data transfer took hours. And what the Council discovered explained everything. Humanity had spent roughly 5,000 years of recorded history in near constant warfare. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire civilization multiple times over. They had fought wars that killed millions, developed tactics and strategies through millennia of conflict, and refined the science of warfare to an art form. And then, somehow, they had managed to largely stop fighting themselves. Process had taken centuries. The establishment of international laws, the creation of global governance structures, the slow and painful recognition that cooperation served everyone better than conflict. They had never forgotten how to fight. Their transition to space had been accompanied by an unspoken agreement among human leadership. They would seek peace among the stars, but they would never be defenseless again. Every colony ship carried hidden weapons. Every civilian vessel had military conversion capabilities. Every orbital station could become a fortress, and Earth itself had been fortified with the obsessive thoroughness of a species that knew extinction was possible because they had nearly accomplished it themselves. When Ambassador Vela finally managed to establish communication with the human diplomatic corps 3 days after the battle, she found herself speaking with a woman named Ambassador Chen. No relation to the fleet admiral, but possessing the same calm demeanor. We need to speak about your military capabilities, Vela began, trying to find diplomatic phrasing for her shock and concern. The Council was not aware that you possessed such extensive defensive forces. Chun's expression remained neutral and professional, but there was something hard in her eyes that had not been present in previous diplomatic exchanges. We never lied about our capabilities, Ambassador, she replied. We simply did not volunteer information that was not requested, and we classified certain assets as civilian infrastructure, which was technically accurate given their dualia's nature. The Krathic Dominion has been defeated, Vela continued, but they still possess their home world and significant industrial capacity. Do you intend to accept their surrender? No, Chen said simply. We intend to ensure they can never threaten anyone again. Vela felt a chill run through her bioluminescent form at the implications of that statement. You mean to continue the war? She said. To invade their territory, we mean to finish what they started, Chen corrected. Ambassador, humanity learned a very painful lesson during our own history. If you defeat an aggressor, but leave them capable of rebuilding and attacking again, you have not achieved peace, you have merely delayed the next war. We will not make that mistake. We will accept nothing less than complete disarmament of Krathic military forces and reconstruction of their society along democratic lines that include representation for all the species they have conquered. Vela wanted to protest, to invoke council protocols about proportional response and non-interferenza, but she had read the human histories now, had seen the files on what happened when humanity showed mercy to aggressive enemies without ensuring they could not rise again. She had also seen what happened when humanity occupied Falm. The fall of the Krathic Dominion took exactly 6 months, and it proceeded with the methodical precision that had characterized every human military operations since the war began. Human fleets moved through Krathic space in coordinated battle groups, isolating key systems and systematically dismantling military infrastructure while broadcasting continuous surrender terms that promised fair treatment for all who complied. Shocked galactic observers was not the military effectiveness of the human advance, but rather what came immediately behind. Engineering corps followed the combat fleets, beginning reconstruction of damaged infrastructure. Within days of systems being secured, medical teams offered treatment to wounded Krathics with the same care they provided to injured humans. Administrative specialists worked with local populations to establish interim governments that included representatives from all species, not just Krathicsy. Humans were not conquering the Dominion in any traditional sense, they were transforming it, dismantling the military dictatorship that had ruled for generations and replacing it with something entirely different than the Krathic homeworld itself. War Premier Drakthos surrendered personally to Fleet Admiral Chen in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. He knelt before her, expecting execution or imprisonment, but instead received terms that confused him. "You will stand trial for your crimes," Chen informed him. "But that trial will be conducted by an independent judiciary that includes Krathic judges, human judges, and neutral observers from the Galactic Council. You will have legal representation and the opportunity to defend yourself if convicted. Your sentence will be determined by law, not by vengeance." Drakdos looked up at the human admiral with incomprehension that bordered on suspicion. "Why?" he asked simply. "I attacked your people without cause. I killed thousands of your colonists, and I threatened your homeworld with destruction. Why would you show me any mercy at all?" Chen's expression softened slightly, though sadness filled her eyes, "because we learned through terrible experience that revenge and brutality create cycles of hatred that last for generations." She replied, "We could kill you, and many of my people would support that decision. But executing defeated leaders without trial makes martyrs and teaches nothing, except that might makes right. We want something better. Both for ourselves and for your people." The trial of War Premier Drakthos became a defining moment in galactic history, establishing precedents for war crimes prosecution that the Council would later adopt as standard practice. More importantly, it demonstrated to every species watching that humanity meant what they said about establishing just and lasting peace throughout former Dominion space. The pattern of occupation and reconstruction continued. Military installations were dismantled, but industrial capacity was preserved and retooled for civilian production. Conquered client species were offered independence or autonomous status within a new federal structure. Krathic civilians received humanitarian aid and educational programs designed to help them transition from authoritarian rule to democratic governance. The humans drew heavily on their own historical experience, applying lessons learned from post-World War to reconstruction efforts. They made mistakes, certainly, and cultural misunderstandings occurred frequently, but they also demonstrated a commitment to rebuilding rather than exploiting, to reconciliation rather than punishment. 6 months after the Battle of Seoul, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the question of what to do about humanity. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species and dozens of observer delegations from non-member civilizations who wanted to witness history being made. Ambassador Vela had spent those 6 months traveling between human-occupied systems and the Council headquarters, Gathering information and preparing her report, she floated to her designated speaking position, her bioluminescent form pulsing with the gravity of the moment. The question before this council, she began, is whether humanity's actions constitute a violation of our principles or an application of them. I have reviewed extensive documentation of human occupation policies, interviewed beings from 17 different species living in formerly Krathic-controlled systems, and consulted with experts on post-conflict reconstruction. What I have found challenges many of our assumptions about how civilized species should conduct themselves after military victory. She activated holographic displays showing images from across the former Dominion. Schools being built. Hospitals treating all species equally. Krathic and human children playing together in reconstructed parks. The humans did not conquer the Krathic Dominion. Bela continued. They liberated it from a militaristic government that had oppressed its own people for generations. They are not exploiting the Dominion's resources for their own benefit, but rather investing heavily in reconstruction that will primarily benefit local populations. And they are establishing governmental structures that will allow for peaceful, democratic rule once human occupation forces withdraw. Not everyone in the council was convinced. Several species called for sanctions, arguing that allowing one member species to unilaterally invade and occupy another civilization, regardless of justification, set a dangerous precedent. Of this, pointed out that humanity had revealed massive hidden military capabilities and questioned what else they might be concealing. The debate raged for hours until High Chancellor Vermex finally called for order and requested that the human representative be allowed to address the council directly. Ambassador Chen entered the Grand Chamber alone, walking calmly to the central platform despite the weight of thousands of eyes upon her from dozens of different species. Honored members of the Galactic Council, she began, I stand before you today to present something that humanity hoped we would never need to share. Our complete and unredacted history. With a gesture, she activated the data transfer that would send every detail of human civilization to council archives. We came to the stars, hoping to leave our violent past behind. Chen continued, her voice steady and clear. We hoped that by joining a peaceful galactic community, we could become better than we had been. We hoped we would never need the weapons we built or the skills we maintained. The Krathic Dominion made that hope impossible. She paused, gathering her thoughts, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of thousands of years of human experience. Our history is filled with wars, genocides, and atrocities that shame us deeply, she said. We have fought wars over resources, ideologies, religions. In simple hatred, we have developed weapons capable of destroying our entire world multiple times over. We have come perilously close to our own extinction more times than we care to remember, but we also learned from those failures. We learned that defeating an enemy is easy, but building a lasting peace is hard. We learned that revenge feels satisfying in the moment, but creates cycles of violence that last for generations. We learned that the only way to truly win a war is to transform your enemies into partners who have no interest in future conflict. 8. She activated another holographic display, this one showing historical images from Earth. Devastated cities being rebuilt, former enemies working together, prosperity emerging from the ashes of total war after our most devastating global conflict. We could have destroyed our defeated enemies completely, Chen explained. Instead, we occupied their territory. Yes, but we also invested heavily in their reconstruction. We helped them establish democratic governments and rebuild their economies. We turned nations that had sought our destruction into some of our closest allies and trading partners. That is what we are doing with the Krathic Dominion. Not because we are saints or because we have no desire for revenge, but because our history taught us that this is the only path that leads to genuine, lasting peace. The chamber fell silent as the implications of her words settled over the assembled. Representatives, we understand that our military capabilities alarm you, Chen continued. We understand that our hidden fleets and secret preparations seem paranoid or aggressive. But we built those defenses because our history taught us that extinction is always possible. We maintained military strength in secret, not to threaten others, but to ensure that if someone attacked us, we would survive. And we are using that strength now, not for conquest, but for the same purpose we use all tools to build something better than what existed before. She looked directly at the various species representatives. Meeting their eyes with steady confidence, "We did not want this war," she said quietly, "but we will finish it properly. We'll accept nothing less than complete demilitarization of aggressive forces and reconstruction of societies along peaceful, democratic lines. And when that is complete, we will withdraw our occupation forces and allow those societies to govern themselves. We ask only that the Galactic Council recognize what we are doing, applying the painful lessons of our own history to prevent future conflicts and build a more peaceful galaxy." For all species, the vote that followed was contentious, but ultimately decisive. 1-9. Species voted in favor of recognizing humanity's actions as legitimate self-defense in post-conflict reconstruction. Well voted against, citing concerns about precedent and human military power. 6 abstained, indicating they needed more time to reach a conclusion.